Her counterpart in the Department of Medieval Art, Barbara Drake-Bain, is a leading authority on early Christian reliquaries from France. Dr. Bain will focus on the Christian reliquary sculpture that is in the first gallery of Eternal Ancestors, and some of the issues, both aesthetic and functional, that resonate with African reliquaries. The reception of the sculptural elements from equatorial African reliquaries in the West is examined in the second section of the exhibition. This afternoon, Jack Flam, a leading authority on the early 20th century Western avant-garde, will share his perspectives on that aspect of these works. And on the left is a photograph in the exhibition by Alfred Stieglitz that dates to 1916, that was taken in his gallery, featuring a Kota reliquary of the kind that's in the exhibition as a focal point. And on the right, an image of Derain's studio in the same year that features the astonishing masterpiece in the Metropolitan's collection, Fang Female Figure. In Eternal Ancestors, we go beyond the narrative of modernism by making a concerted effort to evoke the context that originally informed the experience of these works. The historian Jan van Sina pioneered the meaningful framework of an equatorial tradition for understanding the shared cultural heritage of the many distinct but closely related peoples whose forms of artistic expression are examined comparatively here for the first time. Karen Kleiman is a historian whose work has built upon that foundation. She has contributed a highly original overview of the way in which the 14 distinct ethnic groups represented through their art relate to one another in terms of shared political institutions and religious practices. Finally, as Joseph noted, we had invited Professor Jean-Paul Notwe to join us from Cameroon to share his insights into ancestor veneration and funerary art in Cameroon, which marks the point of departure and threshold into this equatorial tradition. Regrettably, a conflict arose and with his schedule that has prevented him from traveling to join us today. The African artistic traditions represented at this particular moment at the Metropolitan may go back hundreds of years. The only physical record that we are aware of, however, the sculptural one preserved in the West, is highly fragmentary. Given the vulnerability of wood sculpture to insect damage, fire, and climactic effects, this material evidence was probably no more than a century old when it was collected by Europeans during the late 19th through first half of the 20th centuries. Although it is reasonable to imagine there were antecedents to these highly complex genres that were developed over many centuries, we may never have any material or documentary evidence to establish this. We do know, however, that at least as far back as the 19th century, Bangwa, Fang, Kota, Tsogo, Punu, Teke, Bwende, Bembe, and Ngata sculptors addressed the challenge of creating simulacra of the ancestors that expanded upon concrete vestiges of their physical being. The commissioning of these works not only fortified ties with them in the afterlife, but also revealed the manner in which regional elites envisioned their own immortality. Through these representations, regional artists reflected upon and codified a state of being that transcends death as an ideally dynamic and vital condition. In my remarks this morning, I want to focus on the highly sophisticated visual language that regional artists developed for their preeminent form of expression. While a plurality of preferred idioms and media emerged, it is striking that those creative solutions share fundamental overarching conceptual and aesthetic resonances. Given the immediacy of the ties to the ancestors these works serve to enhance, artists explored formal solutions that emphasized the relevance of their subjects through their gazes, gestures, active stances, and vibrant palettes. This aesthetic that I'm going to explore with you has to do with a number of different fundamental aspects of their definition. Chief among these are the distillation of imagery to essential forms, the harnessing of color and light, the emphasis on balance and symmetry, the appropriation of precious secondary materials, and the development of dynamically alternating surfaces that engage the eye. Although most of the works in this exhibition are the isolated sculptural elements from larger bipartite reliquary ensembles, the one from southern Cameroon that confronts us at the entrance places in dramatic evidence the original integration of vessel and sculptural component. The enormous cylindrical bark container that you can see in the work on the left is physically robust and dominant in scale. At the summit, balanced along the perimeter of the rim, is the relatively delicate pair of carved wood figurative elements. Berlin's Volkerkunde Museum collection archives document that the relics originally housed within were derived from 9 generations of exceptional individual members of the lineage of this shrine's owners. It is noteworthy that over time, the power of relics as points of contact with extremely remote ancestors were perceived to dissipate in their efficacy. This reflects the fact that those individuals were less vividly remembered by the living and thus considered less potentially responsive to their prayers for intervention. Consequently, a family's most remote relics were periodically updated with those drawn from more recently departed generational leaders. The sacra within was accessible only to the elders who served as keepers of the family history and intermediaries with its notable protagonists. In contrast, the sculptural elements were intended as the visual nexus of engagement with the reliquary, accessible to universal scrutiny and purposefully exposed to the gaze of the uninitiated. These idealized guardians that direct their gazes out to the viewers at large are depicted at the prime of their lives, bedecked with the insignia of warriors and chiefs. Most impressive in this instance is the glorious headdress of blue turako feathers that crown the head of the centrally positioned male figure. A bird considered dangerous to approach, its plumage was awarded to youths that acquitted themselves bravely in life and death conflicts as warriors. Ultimately, such representations both referenced founders of a lineage as well as a synthesis of successive generations of their distinguished offspring. Consequently, rather than portray any specific individuals, the couple that presides over the familial altar was conceived as a condensed visual summation of the venerated lineage members that merited representation through their relics. Reflection on the nature of the sacra appears to have led artists to distill this imagery in other ways. The fact that the relics themselves were discrete particles drawn from a corporeal whole is apparent formally in Fang sculpture. This is seen in the sculptor's atomization of segments of the body through its rendering as a series of autonomous but lucidly interrelated components that you can see in both these works that are in the exhibition.